This is Edtech People, a podcast where we get to meet those working in EdTech, exploring their journeys, roles and insights. You can catch up on our previous episodes at any time by searching for us wherever you get your podcasts or visiting our website at www.edtechpeople.co.uk. We're always on the lookout for guests, so if you're interested in coming on the podcast, please follow the link on our website and let us know. Hello and welcome to another episode of Edtech People. It's great to be hosting alongside my guest this evening. She's Caroline Pardoe. Caroline, good evening.
Good evening. Hi, Matt.
It's great to have you on board. You're currently an assistant head over at a school that I've worked with for quite a long time, now over the last 3 years or so. Tell us about you, a bit about your role and what you've been up to.
Yeah, so I have just wrapped up, in fact, but that is a story in itself. But yes, I have just wrapped up my role as assistant principal at Bluecoat in Warsaw, and we have been working together, have we not, Matt, for I don't know, I think probably longer than I realised. Yeah, and a lot of that time has been very closely with Kinsero. And you. I remember meeting you your first day in the offices, Matt. Yeah.
I know. Do you know what actually saw on my Instagram the other day? There was a picture from on this day, which was when you put one of the coffee cups up on a cone for keeping a parking space for me. Yeah, that did make me laugh. Yeah, in a very small car park.
There is still a small black market trade going on in school with the Kinsero chalk mugs. I don't know if you still have those, but those and the pens. I mean, merch counts. The pens they never dropped off the lanyard. They would survive about 2 to 3 washes of the hand in a school. And you know how important the hand is in a school day, like the to-do list is on the hand. The urgent to-do list is on the hand, I should say.
Your role at Bluecoat was around IT, obviously an EdTech podcast. So give me a bit of background around that role and what you've been trying to achieve over the last few years whilst you were there.
Well, I don't know how many other school leaders would be in the same position as me, but it was definitely a role upon roles that popped a little bit out of nowhere. So I'm going to say it was a February. Was it? Yeah, I think it was February 2020. And we all know what happened in March 2020, right? So picture Feb 2020. We don't yet know what is on the cards with COVID, but the boss pulls me into his office and says, "Oh, Caroline, your SLT link for a few departments, obviously, one of those is computing and IT. I sort of, I'm a linguist myself, Matt, so I handle the EBAC zone of the school generally. So one of those, Caroline, is computing and IT. How would you feel about taking on the role of strategic lead for IT? Seems to go quite naturally." Absolutely clueless. Matt did not know what this role would entail and come to entail. So I said, yeah, sure. That sounds really interesting. Let's go for it. Always up for something new. I enjoy a challenge. I like to keep things a little fresh. So school life is never boring. And I'm going to say that the EdTech world that then opened up before me has been one of the greatest revelations. Yeah, and I've come to, I think it's fair to say I've had a very definitely love-hate relationship with it, probably even minute by minute at times.
Me too.
Napping on the floor of the IT base. The migration to the cloud was probably a low point. I mean, the IT base, so disgusting. But, my brain just gets to that point where it's like switch it off, switch it on again itself. So just lay down, fell fast asleep, woke up 20 minutes later. Nothing had changed, Matt. We were still in the same position everywhere. But I felt better. But yeah, so that probably sums it up. Love-hate relationship, but definitely really leaning in the last couple of years more towards the love because of how impactful it is and how complex. I enjoy the complexity of it, which might be odd. And I think it can be such a challenge for schools to really get a good handle and a good grip on their own edtech, their own infrastructure, where they want to take it. And boy, have I learned a lot. Yeah, about the
But,
strategy needed
but
and the support needed. Yeah, it's got to be right for each school.
it's been great to see, actually, when we were working together, that development in how you're looking for that eagerness to understand the reason why. It wasn't just
Yeah.
accepting what we were saying, it was, yeah, but
The why.
why?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. And actually, it makes jobs of those who aren't in the classroom, such as myself, really more um, easier, because it gives us an insight into the challenges that the end user is experiencing on a daily, in the classroom, with all the other pressures in the school that come along with it. And we always, when I'm IT through and through, but you do need to be reminded sometimes that there's a knock-on effect. If we don't fix that, then kids aren't going to eat, and that's more than IT. If you don't fix this, then the safeguarding issues. If you don't do this, that there's those different impacts. So, given before that time when you became a strategic lead on the IT side of things, would you say you was a heavy user of IT in your classrooms? Did you want to use it more? Was it not really on your radar? Did you not really care about it too much?
I'm going to say light to average user. I think I did the basics. Um, I think I think COVID did for me and for lots of educators something that might have been hard to achieve, definitely within the timescale, without such a I don't know how to describe it, such a huge event, but a transformational period, obviously. Um, I think the reality of having to embrace and rapidly to keep connection with staff, to keep connection with community, to keep connection with the children, ultimately, so much more became necessary. And we adopted teams for the first time, whilst, during school closures. And I think from there, the potential just seemed huge, but also the potential divide seemed to widen up before us as well. So I really remember, it was really clear how important it was for the future of education to have great digital adoption, digital skills as staff, fighting tooth and nail to get the time to develop those. When schools are super busy with a million different priorities, and it can be really hard to lend all the time you'd love to give to the development of that sort of digital expertise. I remember thinking, I don't know enough myself, as you said, always pursuing the why, the deeper understanding, even with such a limited basic knowledge myself. I needed to know so much more. I remember putting myself on the Digital Champion Level 3 apprenticeship to gain just a better, broader understanding of what was going on behind the scenes of the infrastructure. And then at the same time, simultaneously pushing myself as a classroom teacher and as a senior leader for wider adoption, but also modelling that within the classroom myself became so important. So all of my classes, we'd have a weekly drive on digital learning. And I have to say, just the proof is in the pudding, the proof is in the classroom and in the kids that they love and just engage so well, broadly on average. Not every kid finds it easy or natural, but broadly speaking, kids love to engage through digital means in the classroom and out of it. So, yeah, so much potential and so many challenges all mixed in.
So what kind of was the after lockdown then, when technology was, you were seeing a potential there, and obviously you experienced some of that through lockdown. Was there something that you then took into the classroom that was transformational in the classroom? Because a lot of the things that I see coming out of lockdown is that we lots of schools missed an opportunity with it. They went back to normal very, very quickly because some of those challenges that we're talking about, whether that's having the people time and headspace to adopt that whilst trying to recover from the losses in education and learning that happened during lockdown, whether that was or is financial, not having the money to realise the dreams and the get to where they want to be, or the knowledge on there. So was there something that you took from lockdown and actually put into the classroom, put into your lessons, that really was something that you can be almost grateful for, that experience of going through lockdown to have achieved?
I think the collaborative element and the real time element, being able to save time as a teacher, what I'm going to describe is a little bit multi-layer. So through Microsoft Teams, being able to set up an assignment, have students work within that, and then submit it, and then myself lean into that submission via however I'd chosen to have that come to me digitally, to then essentially rapidly learn to rip through students engagement with whatever it was that we'd been focusing on as our learning point, and offer them feedback one to one that then could be actioned the very next lesson, or as soon as they leaned in digitally to themselves to action that as a time saver, as an educator, as an increasing engagement, and teaching students to operate in tight time frames, and pushing them to submit digitally rather than rely on, for students that's a transition as well, working entirely digitally away from paper and pens. I think that's been really significant. Behind the scenes, as on the sort of more strategic leadership front, I would say it sounds a little bit I'm surprising myself here. The SharePoint type aspect, so the file transformation, where it had, stuff had been shared via servers, unreliable, everything could shift and on the way be reorganized. So the years and years and years of ugly staff shared area, I don't know what to say. The chaos could be cleansed, cleaned up. So a great opportunity there as well. And just the fluidity then that comes from that level of collaborative online working. I think once you've lived with it a few years, it's easy to forget. It's not that long ago that we weren't working simultaneously on the same document from different positions at different times during a 24-hour space, whatever might suit your working habit. And then saving that in a sort of shared area, going back, just that level of collaboration, it's easy to forget, I think. And if you've never had it, I don't know. I honestly can't imagine working effectively without that now.
There are still schools without it. There are still schools. I'm sure you can imagine that, but there are still schools that, when we talk about that digital transformation, when we talk about moving them forward, sometimes I have to say to other people, actually, we can't talk about getting to this location and be able to do that, because the very basics of being able to access a file at any time from anywhere is something that they've never experienced. They've, to them, it's still revolutionary to open up remote desktop and be able to remote in to the server from something. Whereas
you just shows how far I've come, Matt. You just put me on edge.
no,
I'm now
absolutely.
feeling tense because that just that shouldn't.
It's still
The
out there.
security stuff is so real for schools
Yes.
that does put me on edge. Mm.
Yeah, it puts me on edge as well when I know exactly some schools that are doing it, and some others that, speak to me in my day-to-day role, or even I've seen it recently looking just on posts on LinkedIn, and there's a particular good example at the moment with the Windows 10 coming up end of life in October. Now, this isn't just something that's been plucked out of the air. This has been planned for many, many years.
Yeah.
And, we've been talking to schools for about well over a year and talking about it. And there's still schools saying, no, I'm not going to invest in the new hardware. Well, your hardware's got to be over 5-6 years old easily at this point to not be compatible with Windows 11.
Mm.
And no, lots of people saying, "Oh, it's just a gimmick to make me spend more money." Well, that might be true. That might be Microsoft's taking that route to go down there. But none of us are in control of what Microsoft decides to do with that kind of thing. But
Exactly right.
actually, the bottom line is you need to do it. And actually, how long have your students and your staff been using Windows 11 on their personal devices, and you're now holding them back
Yeah.
by many years? by not letting them engage with the latest technology. So I think it's very prominent out there, the amount of schools that are still being held back. What, being somebody who's been in your position to lead and push forward, was that something that you came across initially? And if so, Caroline, what's the answer? How do we solve that?
I feel like there's an employment offer here, Matt, if I can solve that for you. Aside, I think what we're touching on here, two things have been running through my mind as you were just talking through, because I really identify with all of that. It's difficult when the tough reality in schools is that we are driving all of the time to deliver the absolute best that we can. We shape up a school improvement plan year on year, and then with a longer term view that hits what we need to hit. The tough reality is that stretched budgets, stretched time resource in particular, and a directed time budget that means what it means for staff and CPD and change. And I am 16 years into education, and the budgets since I began working within education have just shrunk to such a size. You always think it can't get any tighter, and then it does. And so we keep moving, we keep evolving. What that means is that too often, too much of the time, I think schools are simply left to react to external pressures. You mentioned Microsoft's it's October 2025, isn't it? October this year deadline on Windows 10. We've talked already about a pandemic that shifted things significantly and forced a lot. We haven't, and then you have just mentioned Microsoft's deadline. That is forcing many schools to think differently and seize that opportunity. And then I think we haven't mentioned, the government's moves more recently to define more clearly in statutory terms what schools need to do to meet certain standards in terms of EdTech and their IT provision. These are all external forces, not decided by the school leaders in a particular school or particular trust, that you then decide how you're going to respond, don't you? Either it's a submarine, but it is going to happen anyway, and it will have impacts for your security, for your provision, and for the children that you serve. Or you can see it as an opportunity and think, I would really have loved to be able to choose this way forwards myself. It would have been nice to choose the time to adopt Teams, and I wouldn't have chosen to do that all sat at home working remotely for the first time. I wouldn't have chosen that to be the methodology. But it was an opportunity nonetheless, and with lasting impact because we embraced it. So is there an answer? I think there is something of a reality in saying that until schools are pushed by a statutory framework or by a quality assurance factor or by an, sadly, an inspection descriptor, it to do things a certain way or to a certain standard, it can be difficult for school leaders to feel it's justified to put the budget away from, we mentioned hungry children, away from things that would make a difference. Are you going to take away some holiday school clubs that help keep them safe in the holidays to pay for additional devices? There are tough realities for school leaders to have to manage, and they know, I hope they know their community and their children really well. But I think that you're right that the digital era is more than with us, and the speed of change is only increasing. And I really do feel for any schools schools like the ones you seem to be describing, who might feel like they've missed those moments, that chance to react and begin a different approach, a different way of looking at EdTech, because that does mean that children are at the mercy of the privilege or lack of privilege that they might have in the home, the access to devices that they may or may not have. In the schools that I've served in the latter sort of 10 years of my career, it just wouldn't it's just not the reality that children have their own device at home necessarily, and it's certainly not a productivity device, more of a, maybe a mobile phone, but that, that has its real limitations. And then the quality of Wi-Fi is still not guaranteed for plenty of students. And I think what it is a serious business deciding and defining what you can do in schools to prepare them. We want to accelerate children into whatever future lies before them, for them to be all that they can be. And in the world of work, in the world of remote working, in a world of, entrepreneurs, in a world of so many different opportunities that are ever evolving, it's hard to think of many that don't use tech. And where the digital divide widened in COVID times, certainly in my experience, between the haves and the have-nots, or the haves and have a little, and have a lot and have a bit, it is upon school leaders now to remember that, not let that become archived into history, to remember that that was a thing and it still is a thing that, yeah, it does need taking seriously. I don't know if I've shaped an answer for you there, Matt. Probably not.
Do you think? I mean, there's some really important points that you make there, and a lot of it is easily identifiable with. Do you think it's a generational thing in terms of the current leadership that we have in schools? Do you think there's a difference between those that are digital natives, that are now well established in many schools, people who've always known technology, whereas those perhaps in leadership positions who have been around a bit longer, perhaps they are loath to put their trust in technology, given the letdowns that have undoubtedly happened over the years. I mean, we all know schools that have been promised transformational solutions with, interactive whiteboards or voting systems. We talked about that on the last podcast. These systems that have sat around doing nothing for so long, to then now talk to them about moving to the cloud or adopting cloud technologies. Does it bring up nightmares of them previous having to use, I've forgotten the name of them now, but the online platforms which they had just for their schools and used to upload the content to, and then you'd finally get people doing it, and then they'd not renew it, and people put all this effort into it and they lose it. Do you think that's a generational thing, and just a matter of time until things get better?
I think there are definitely elements of truth in that everybody has. I mean, every tech team and every top team in a school has their trauma, their Edtech trauma stories. Those platforms that died a death, so much invested. And I think also the money frustration is real, continues to be real, that any transformation does cost. And I think it can be really hard work. It can take a lot of hours, a lot of slog to grasp truly as a school where the money is going to be spent in order to save, and when will those savings be realised?
Yeah.
What will that look like? What will that feel like? If I'm investing in the short term, where are we quickly going to see that in the long term? And investing in the short term can be tough for schools who have really had to bootstrap their budgets. And then we got onto things like leasing devices, don't we? I already know. My Mac brain is real these days. The element of my brain that is still yours. I think.
I think it's
There's the trauma side of things. I think it's nice in a way for the those on the sort of more technical side of the bridge here, to look over the bridge at schools and think, when the leadership changes, and a generation or two down, which is maybe what we're suggesting here, the incoming generation of school leaders, the upcoming generation, will think differently. I would probably offer a tough reality check on that and say that I don't think there's any such guarantee. I think that schools, because what isn't changing generationally is how stretched everything in your average state school is. I don't mean just budget, I just mean the time resource, I mean the energy, the time that you have within your day to upskill, to consider new concepts, to grapple with the discussions and the debates. And everybody has a different view, a slightly different answer, and then to decide and define what is your answer as an organization, what fits you best. You have to really know your own setup as well to define that. And that took me a long time to really realize how deeply we needed to know our own infrastructure and our own teaching and learning habits and needs and development points, what our students needed, what they have at home, what they don't. All of that can be uncomfortable and long haul work before you can make any sort of changes. Is it going to? I don't know, Matt. I don't know if it's going to shift.
Sorry to interrupt the podcast, and we'll jump back in shortly, but I want to introduce the sponsors who make Edtech People possible. All are recognisable brands to anyone working in EdTech. Smoothall need no introduction to those working in schools, with 1 in 3 in the UK using their internet filtering, which provides real-time filtering wherever a user is and on any device. They also provide Smoothall Monitor, which is an essential safeguarding solution which allows monitoring of devices and captures for schools. You can find out more about Smoothall Filter and Smoothall Monitor and the other advice and support they've got available at smoothall.com. Next up, Secure Schools are an education-only cybersecurity team working to help schools understand the security within their schools and, crucially, provide support and training for those working within the school or trust. Recently, they have released their free Cyber School tool, allowing schools to assess their cybersecurity easily by answering key questions and getting a dashboard with all their results. Find out more by visiting their website at secureschools.com. First Pillar provide extensive support to schools in a wide range of areas. Their founder, Emma Gray, is an experienced school business leader who now works to support schools in all their operational needs, leaving them to focus on educating. You can see all the services that Emma offers at First Pillar and some great blog posts by visiting her website at firstpillar.co.uk.
Hello listeners of Edtech People, I'm Craig. When I worked in a school, I noticed how challenging it was for teachers to find and reserve shared spaces. That's why I created Classroom Bookings, an easy-to-use online room booking system. With Classroom Bookings, staff can reserve rooms at any time from anywhere. Designed for schools of all sizes, it supports multi-week timetables and flexible period times. Plus, the cloud service is priced at just £149 per year with no limit on the number of rooms or users. Try it free today or find out more at classroombookings.com.
I think 2 points that you've made we can join together actually quite nicely to I don't know whether it'll give us an answer on the generational thing, but when you're commenting about the device equity, so the ability for somebody to go home and access the same things that they can in school using their own resources, whether that's having access to the broadband or the device or indeed the software if they've got a device. The next step to solve that is to give everybody a device. We already know when we're talking about uniform, the stated aim of uniform in lots of schools is that everybody has an equality amongst the students that are wearing that uniform, that one person is not going to come in I don't know, some upmarket clothes and somebody else coming in some down market, I suppose is the opposite, clothes in there as well. To achieve that with devices, you have to be able to provide them, just as we provide uniform for those who can't afford it. And then you're asking the parents who can afford it, obviously, to contribute them, which is, it's not fair. At the end of the day, everybody goes out and earns their money and wants to contribute to their children in that way. But the thought of the schools of achieving that at the moment in this climate is, beyond a joke in many cases. It's just not possible for them to contribute the tens, if not hundreds of £1,000s you need for one-to-one devices, or to ask parents to contribute an amount of it to it as well. Yet I fear that the way that the impact that we need to move it forward and fully realise for the impact on learning is to make that a reality, to make it so that those students, whatever their background, wherever they're learning, whenever they're learning, however they want to learn, are able to do it. All of that can be enabled by having a device in front of them that they can use their way. But until we can get those devices in front of them and get a way to achieve that's equitable and fair and affordable to all, I don't know how we can move it forward on an equal footing for everybody, on an equal way. I think it's a very challenging thing, but that's very much related to school leaders who are, struggling with these tough budgets, lack of time, as you clearly say, amount of things I've got on this plate to then even consider this being an option. It's such a, being somebody who has to go in sometimes, generally I don't go in to sell that. People come to us if they want that, so they're already on board. But I if you go into a school, it's very hard to bring that up as a solution without a want from the school. And I think the majority of cases there isn't a want for, not there isn't a want, there is an understanding that it's not realistic to be able to achieve that.
Such a big topic and so many different thoughts on that, Matt, because it's, from the leadership perspective, you're not just looking at a one-to-one device for the students. Yes, there's the money concept, and there are all different sorts of funding models. You can have parent contribution, you can have, a mixture, so many varieties. I think the teacher training aspect, where the staff upskill is there. You can put a device in kids' hands, and you've made sure that they've got something to work on or something to do. But what's the point of them having that if the staff who work with them are not going to be setting them regular assignments, are not going to be using the immersive tools that light up their educational experience? If the staff aren't ready to work digitally with students, that device is going to have limited purpose, limited effect, limited impact on what they achieve and their outcomes, which is ultimately what schools need to make sure that students leave with. Yet we are desperate in schools to make sure that they leave as rounded future professionals, rounded just people, really. And we understand that digital skills are absolutely part of that. But let's not forget that staff have been wrapped up in doing their day jobs and development for the school, and it's not digital. It's tough to get digital progress prioritised in that sort of real terms. CPD time is ultimately cash. If everyone sat in that staff meeting has a price tag on their head for that hour, that 2 hours, that 4-hour session, imagine a 4-hour session on EdTech, how much progress we could make. How much is that session costing the school? Significant amount. And if it's not going to have really clear outcomes, that's not where any intelligent business leader would place their money. So I think it's multifaceted, isn't it? A one-to-one device program. It sounds great, but then school leaders are so aware of the reality of staff, all the other associated costs to making it worthwhile. And yes, the barriers and the hurdles can seem just then so overwhelming that you forget that leadership does need to be courageous. There is a lot of bravery required and some risk taking. And I think sometimes maybe one of the worst mistakes we can make in schools is to make assumptions on behalf of our families and assumptions on behalf of our children and assumptions on behalf of our staff. Actually, if we said to staff, would you be interested in developing your digital skill set as an expert in teaching and learning? I think probably get quite a number of yes. You might get quite a lot of uncertainty. What does that even mean? But once it was made clear, you'd probably get a lot of interest. And I think a lot of parents would appreciate a reasonably priced means of getting a device into their children's hands. Large families, that is a tough one, because if you have 3, 4, 5 children in the same family attending the same school, needing a device each within a payment program, that's tough. And maybe that needs to be creative thinking on the part of the school to support that family within the community. But
I had to deal with that when I was working for a Catholic trust. That was one of the real challenges, that we had. You'd have 3, 4, 5 children across the 3 tiers, and we're saying about device scheme, 20 quid a month isn't huge amounts, but actually for them it's, you know, £100 a month all in. So it's a very realistic thread. Do you think it's a bit of chicken and egg as well in this situation? Which do you do first? Because if you go to staff with giving them a device, and then they're sat in front of a class who can't interact, so you might want to, you know, adopt immersive reading. You might want to use assignments, as you said, in Teams. But if the kids haven't got a device for you to push it out to, and you're relying on them having a device, then you're not perhaps going to use it. You're not going to perhaps implement some of the, you know, things like PowerPoint Live, or even just the going back to basics, the collaboration, you know, on a Google Sheet, or you know, PowerPoint or something that you put in there, because they don't have the devices. So you give all the staff the devices, but then you're limited by the fact the student don't have devices. And as you rightly say, if you don't give the staff the devices and the students have them, you've got no way forward there. So I think it's very chicken and egg in that regard as well. But I really like what you're saying about needing that bravery from leadership, and I've seen it. I've been lucky when I was working with Paul Heary, who was one of the people that I've had on the podcast before, one of my old bosses. He invested in it for staff and students at the same time, considerable amounts, and it made such a big difference being able to move that forward altogether. I was incredibly lucky to do it in that way. But even today, I've been in a meeting, and it's kind of like, we know, you talked about standards, we know the digital technology standards from the DFE, that's what we work to. But again, you can't deliver it all at once. So if we're moving something to the cloud, got to get the infrastructure ready for it. You've got to get the actual moving to the cloud, and you've got to have the devices, and you've got to have the training. You can't achieve all 4 of them in one budget year. So what do? Do you hide behind infrastructure that nobody's really going to ever appreciate or notice? Do you give them training for something that you don't have the equipment for them to use? Do you you know, do you talk about adoption or stuff and not have the full solution there? Don't have the CPD time. It's a really tough one, isn't it, for leadership to be brave in it, because it would have to be a huge jump and buy-in and adoption to make it. Given where lots of people are starting, it's not a small jump to go to that next level. We're seeing schools that are many years behind where they need to be now, just to be on a level playing field, let alone be ready for the future. And yet, interestingly, the amount of learners and teachers who go to events like BET and other ones and now are interested to move forward is not declining. There seems to be a growth in that, and that's something that you've obviously seen since taking on your role and moving up there. Can you give some advice and insight to what was the best thing that you've achieved over the last few years in your schools that's made a big difference?
I think undoubtedly the move to the cloud. It wasn't simple. I wouldn't ever pretend to another school leader that it was easy. And I think for schools, support partners looking in, this becomes your bread and butter, and it's your most basic understanding of how infrastructure works and needs to work. The ability to communicate that to school leaders who, we've discussed so many times in this conversation already, the spinning plates that they'll have going in their minds and multiple competing priorities on all senses. I think communicating clearly the why, the how much, and then they need to have a who. And I think that the who can be so tough. It's amazing to me still how many schools don't have, I suppose they don't have a me or a you or anything like that within their setup. So they don't have that person who has that responsibility for thinking through. And it does need a bit of an interest and a passion as well. It can be an enormously frustrating area. But that ability to look at all different angles at what's out there and the possibilities, and then the in-depth knowledge of your organisation to start matching and thinking, okay, and sifting, okay, that's a not yet, that's going to have to wait. Let's think about what we can adopt in what sort of timescale and what's reasonable. There are so many moments at the moment that could push schools to think differently. And I think ultimately what's important is that schools don't leave it until exam boards do move to the digital side of things, or until it's virtually impossible for a child to interview successfully for an apprenticeship without digital elements to that interview process, where the sort of reality of what we're preparing the children for and what they experience on a day-to-day kicks in. God forbid the school's data being held to ransom on the security side of things, or a breach, a total breakdown of servers that then costs far more than just the money to replace them. You're thinking reputational damage. You're thinking, there are moments, like Microsoft deciding a bit of a deadline. There are moments like a pandemic that come and go, and it's making the most of those and thinking positively and bravely about them. But then there's also, the crisis moments that can push a school one way or another. Best not to wait until then, hey?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you make such an important point there around the untold cost of being forced into this situation by the worst happening. And cybersecurity is such a big topic at the moment. And you've touched on that earlier on within the podcast. And it must be scary for anybody in a leadership position to, when you understand those risks and the potential for things going wrong. I know there's lots of things that heads leadership have to deal with that do go wrong, and you only have to sit on a safeguarding course to think, actually I can understand some of the wider picture here rather than just the technology. But we all know that if everything's running on technology and that technology goes down, you can't teach kids, you can't safeguard kids, you can't do what you're there to do at the end of the day. But it's still not taken as seriously as what it can be in some quarters. But I think the overwhelming issue is lack of knowledge. I actually think if you can explain it and talk to people about it in a way that is relatable to them, rather than trying to scare them about these things, and weighing up risk versus costs, just having an honest conversation, then we can move it forward. But it is a hell of a challenge, because then you go into the same conversation to change it. It means you have to start from this point here again, which you can't afford to do to get to this point here anytime. And certainly I keep on having the accusation seen to MSPs in general, like some head teachers so anti listening to it because they feel it's all kind of scaremongering and doom and gloom. And then you read on the BBC what's just happened to another school, and you're like, actually no, I'm just somebody who gives the toss, who doesn't want this to happen to your school at the end of the day. Don't always get it right, can't protect everybody. But isn't that true for so many things in education? We don't always get it right every time. We can't help everybody. We can just do our best to help as many people as possible.
Yeah, I think, you'd asked what should we do? What should we tackle first? I think that the security, it is incumbent on schools to take that seriously and to think about their, this phrase will never stop making me chuckle, but their sort of posture, their security posture. And it does need to be deliberate in the same way that you wouldn't just have anyone coming on your school site. So you're not going to have just anyone coming into your digital estate. But I think that the tough reality for schools, my personal thoughts are that I would start with infrastructure. I don't think that there's no point putting however many devices, Windows 10 friendly and everything, into a school as you can afford as a school leader, for the children then to turn around and say, oh, the Wi-Fi is rubbish, because maybe the Wi-Fi is lacking the speed and the strength that it needs to handle that usage. And then the staff are frustrated because they don't really know what to do with these, and suddenly we've got, if devices aren't being utilised for good purposes, they're going to be utilised for less than desirable purposes.
Yeah.
And then that becomes a different kind of hassle for staff to have to deal with or handle. So all of this does need a lot of care, a lot of thought, and a lot of strategy. And I don't know the answer, but how many more years are we going to work at this and trying to communicate this? And where is the answer on the communication? I think probably communication, as just life in general, communication is the key, isn't it? And
Yeah.
there is definitely a disconnect between what the edtech sort of industry knows and sees and can help with, and what schools perceive to be a priority or a necessity or even a desirable. And that disconnect can sometimes, it just feels such a barrier. I think you're exactly right that schools need to hear what's possible. They need to hear what's necessary. They need to hear what's sort of an unavoidable fact. And I think school leaders are used to having a lot of autonomy, and it's enormously frustrating. In fact, I'd probably say it probably just breeds some outrage, downright outrage at times, when some edtech expert pops up and says, you know, your security posture is pretty rubbish, actually, too slack. You're at risk for this, you know, this, and this. You need to sharpen it up. And I think therefore probably partners often feel too hesitant to be that upfront and honest. When I really do believe in just be blunt, just say it exactly. It's what I always loved about you, Matt, is you just say it. Just tell me the truth. Just tell me the reality. Let me ask as many blunt questions as I want to ask, and together we'll find out. Well, I'll then need to decide what's going to be the best recommendation to move forwards with my organisation. And I think every organisation needs sort of the same process. They need to be brave enough to have those honest voices around them, to choose partners who are going to tell them the truth, but then also help them, you know, whatever decision they come to decide to make, that they agree on a rationale. I do think maybe there needs to be a bit more bravery in those partnerships as well, for partners to say, listen, we completely respect your autonomy. You'll decide what you think is best for the school. But if it is at total odds to what we know is best for your organisation, or what we believe is the best methodology for schools or the best approach, we are going to need to leave you to do things your way. And I think that sort of measure is, that's I mean, I get that that's not business friendly, but
no, but it's a
in the long term.
It's a conversation, and actually it's something that we've actively talked about when I was at Lord's IT and since. You know, there's only so many times you can have the same conversation with somebody, and actually reputationally for the business, if a school isn't buying into what you're saying and isn't going down that route, then are you doing either you or them favors by doing it? Because ultimately, if you're supporting them and they come down with a cyber attack, they're going to look at why you weren't taking that route. Now, many people working in the industry and you know, working within schools will maybe turn around and understand why, but there's not a lot of defense that you can have when they're running an outdated piece of software, or they haven't got multi-factor on, all these things that they're told that they need to do and they decide to not to. You'd never turn around and say, well, we told them and they said no. You know, so it is a very, very difficult balance. And although I am one of those people who do go and just say it bluntly, it doesn't always sit me in a good position to do that, exactly for the reason that you're saying, that sometimes people don't want to hear it and don't understand that it's coming from a good place and an understanding place, that actually I need to be honest with you about the situation, but I'm going to support you on whatever your next steps are in it as much as I can. And I think that's a really valid and important point to discuss there, really, about that need for that enhanced partnership to, and that level of trust, which is it's hard to get. And I've always found it being an interesting comparison to when I was working within a school and outside for an MSP. And that was even when I was working for the multi academy that I was in. I had it on both sides, because I was part of the multi academy, leading the IT at the multi academy, so I could effectively say to schools, this is what we've decided that you need to do. And it wouldn't just be me, but I'd be informing that decision. We say to school, no, I'm sorry, you can't use your USB memory sticks. We've discussed it and we've decided that you can't do that. then the difference was when I was supporting schools through
I
Lord's IT.
believe you took the USBs away, Matt. Shocking.
Yes, I know. Lord's IT, then I'd go to a school and I'd say, you need to stop using your memory sticks. And they'd turn around and say, no, we need them. And it's such a hard dynamic then to do it. But the actual difference, the reality of it was actually the opposite of what you might think it might be. Schools didn't like being told by anybody, particularly in a multi-academy when they've just joined. They don't want to be told what to do because they've been promised autonomy, which never works in a large multi-academy anyway. It's the whole point of them is that you join up and you've got some safe thinking. It was actually the schools that brought into the service that we were delivering that was going, actually, we brought into you, we trust you, you're telling us not to do it. Would be daft not to listen to you. But when you're in the organisation telling them, they're like, I'm just not going to listen to you. Don't tell me what to do. I know what I'm doing. It's such an interesting dynamic, and to do that. And it's even true. And you look at within Kinsero, outside as well. There's times when we've had to turn around and say, well, actually, we need to do what we're telling our customers to do. We need to stop using memory sticks. We need to not be using those tools on there. We shouldn't be doing it. So, what for the future? What does that involve for you? What does that involve for your EdTech skills now that you've got, and what are you excited about?
I'm excited about the things that we've touched on, Matt. I think there's so much more that schools can do for their children, for their students, and to grow them to be all that they can be for the future. So what I'm excited about is continuing to use those skills and all that knowledge that I've gained, painful though it might have been at times. I'm passionate about lending that to schools, lending that to organisations so that those disconnects are reduced. If those disconnects are even partly what is responsible for schools feeling ill-equipped or just fighting through the different advice, the different options that they see, or struggling to put aside the time to think about it deeply, to make the best decisions, then that's something I want to help with. I think what's important in all of this is that we've gone down so many different routes in our conversation, as always, Matt. And at the heart of it all, a school leader's heartbeat has to be what is the best thing for the children that I serve? What is the best thing for them right now at this point? What is the best that I can do in this area? I don't think any sensible school leader whose bum belongs on their seat can ignore the digital reality that children need to be prepared for. I don't think that's an option. I think that's a valid option. So if we're not ignoring it, we have to engage with it. So let us help you with that. And then let's just keep returning to that key driver. The reason that we should all be in the business is that we want to provide the absolute best that we can, best in class, best service, best educational experience for students that transforms their life chances, ultimately at the end of the day. That whatever they arrive to you with or without, that they're going to leave you with greater, better, with what they need to compete in the world that they're going to enter.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. As quite often you summarize it, and the clarity in what you're saying is so clear in that. So I really appreciate that input. I always ask at the end of the podcast 2 questions for people.
I bet everybody answers them beautifully. Yeah, let's see me try, Matt. Go for it.
Don't worry. They're not technical questions, so I'm not going to test you on that.
Access point, Matt. That's what it means.
Yes. So, what piece of technology have you experienced in a classroom that you would never ever like to see again? Which bit has left such an impression on you that you really didn't like? In the past, we've had things like OHPs. We've had voting systems and stuff like that. Some people have even listed Sims in its entirety on there. So what piece of technology would you never want to see in the classroom again?
As ever, Matt, I'm sure you could predict I wasn't going to give you an exact answer. So my answer isn't really a piece of kit. It's a scenario. It's a reality that can still way too often be the case. It's the fact that you just need to it's the first minute of a classroom. It's the first minute of a lesson. I don't want 50,000 billion 11 tabs to have to open. I don't want to sign in to your million gazillion different online platforms to get through my lesson, to take my register, to award behaviour points, to set a detention if it's necessary, to engage digitally with the children. I don't want to do that in 1,000 different places whilst I'm live in the room with 30 plus individuals who need me. I don't want to do that. I've got an entry on a physical door to handle. I don't want your 4-minute thing that is the reality of all that nonsense. So that scenario, it's not a product, but that scenario.
But do you know what? I love that. I can really identify with that. That is such a good answer. And the follow-up from that is obviously, what are you most excited about? We've banned a little bit AI from this answer because it is the go-to for everything these days is AI powered.
Okay, I wouldn't have gone there. Okay. So I mean, I do think it's I am deeply interested in it.
Yes, absolutely.
On a pilot with Intel and Tablet Academy, sort of looking into that in some detail, a small sort of trial panel. That was super interesting work. Experimenting with it all. But I wouldn't have gone there straight away. No. So what am I most excited about? Is that a question?
Yeah.
Oh, on the tech front. I am excited about that greater equality, that greater equity of access that we've talked about. And again, I know I'm not giving you a product or a piece of kit, so I'm sorry about it.
No, but
I'm very excited for us to move closer, even if it is school by school, even a year group by year group, that progress towards 93-94% of children in the UK being state educated, and their experience of EdTech, their experience of digital learning, digital working. I can't handle the idea that that is less than the 6 to 7% that may have greater advantages through their educational setup in life. So I am most excited about school leaders, school teachers, school supports, school partners who are willing to do the tough work, the slog work on pushing that forward, and then over something of a line where we would be in this conversation, Matt. Imagine a day where we're saying most schools have really moved significantly. Most schools' infrastructure is secure, it's sound, it's effective. Most schools have all the devices they would want to have in students' hands or in classrooms, whatever they envision that to look like. Most schools have made it in some sort of sense. That's what I'm excited about.
What an answer. Yeah. And I think bottom line, if we weren't excited by that, we wouldn't be excited by EdTech at all. Because obviously that's
I don't think we'd be talking.
No,
right,
exactly. That's an outcome. So if anybody ever asks me those questions now, I'm going to nick your responses for them, because I think that was spot on. Caroline, it's been so good to have you on here and to share this hour's worth of chat. So thank you so much for your time this evening. I really appreciate it. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way that they can do that?
Love a bit of LinkedIn these days, Matt.
Yes.
Find me there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Brilliant. Caroline, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.